Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name is Glenn Schneider, and I am the Chief Program Officer at the Horizon Foundation. And on behalf of all of our co-sponsors, ACS and HOCO Respond, all the funders of HOCO Respond, we thank you for coming to this. We decided that this was an important thing for us to do because it was not all that long ago that we started hearing from folks after the new administration started doing some work and after people started losing jobs and facing the uncertainty of what's this going to mean for my client base, what's this going to mean for me as a nonprofit person, we thought it was an important thing for us to really talk about uncertainty and how we can actually come up with strategies for dealing with uncertainty, which might cause anxiety in your life or anxiety in your family. So we are happy today to have our friends at the Went Center come in and join us and give us some of those tips. So thank you, Melissa, for doing that. Just to let you know, we did something similar during COVID times for our first responders, and we heard great things from them saying, thank you for giving us these tips during this time. It's a pretty uncertain time, full of anxiety, and hopefully you can use these techniques as you go on throughout the number of coming months. So thanks. I'm going to throw it over to Melissa. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. And thanks, Melissa, for doing this for us.
Of course. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate that. Just some housekeeping, folks. You can put questions in the chat. You can also use the Q&A feature. This is being recorded, and so you'll be able to review it at a future time as well. But I'm going to share my screen and get us started with some slides. As Glenn said, my name is Melissa. I am a social worker by training. I work at the Went Center for Loss and Healing. We are a small nonprofit located in Washington, D.C., and we've been around for 50 years, and our focus is solely grief, loss, and trauma. So we support individuals and communities who are navigating life's worst moments. And we do that through individual and group therapy, both in our office and via telehealth. And we serve people in DC, Maryland, and Virginia for our clinical services. And then we do a lot of work in DC public and public charter schools, and we working with kids who are navigating grief and loss. And we do a lot of training with surrounding communities to the DC area as well as across the country to help folks understand the impact of grief, loss, and trauma, to help themselves, to help those they care about, and to figure out how to navigate difficult times, which is kind of where we are. So as Glenn said, we're going to talk about the things that we can do for ourselves as well as for others. Because when times get difficult, what we have learned at the One Center in our 50 years is that actually community and being in community with other people is really, really important. That isolation exacerbates anxiety, it exacerbates uncertainty. And so, as our founder said, that no one should have to grieve alone, we also believe no one should have to navigate uncertainty alone. And so, we hope that this can give you some context as well as some tips and tricks and tools to sustain yourself and those that you care about. Okay. So I'm going to start off with an image because what we know is that grief and trauma don't actually live in the verbal parts of our brain. They live in the nonverbal parts of our brain to start, and then through therapy and experiences and trusted relationships, they can move into the verbal parts of our brain, which is how we can add language to our experience. But I usually like to have some sort of image to prompt a curiosity within ourselves. So as you look at this image, I want you to consider what comes up for you with thoughts, what comes up for you with sensations on your body, what emotions you might be having as you look at that. You just take a second and notice that. As I've been sharing this picture with people, and we've been talking about uncertainty for really the past 6 months or so, and as people have looked at this image, I've heard people say, this brings up chaos or confusion or overwhelm or anxiety and exhaustion or fear that I can't untangle this and I have to untangle it and figure out what it is. Some people have named irritability and anxiety and anger as they've tried to look at it. And so lots of different emotions, sensations on the chest, in the belly, in the jaw, as you find yourselves holding your jaw tight as you look at that picture. I want to ask what would happen for you if I told you that in that picture there was a word that was written, and there was only one word, and it was the one correct word, and you had to find it. What might that do to you? When I've introduced that idea, people have said that some people get motivated, like, oh, okay, now I know what I'm looking for. And so I need to look for a word in there. And so it's motivating or exciting to actually have, a focus for the puzzle. And other people have said, I give up. Nope, overwhelmed, frustrated, anxious. Just tell me what the word is. Why are you torturing me with this picture? And what I'll tell you is there's no word in there, and you don't have to actually untangle it. But this is of what we are experiencing right now in our communities and in our space. And so as we look at this, know that this chaos, this confusion that we're experiencing can impact us both through our bodies, through our thoughts, and through our sensations. So, as a grief and trauma therapist, I look at most things through the lens of grief and trauma. And I've been really considering over the past number of years, really, as Glenn said, during COVID as well, as the past 8 months or so, thinking how we're looking at this through grief and trauma. So, when we look at it through the lens of grief, for many people who have had an impact on their job, we're talking about grieving their identity or their role, grieving their professional sense of self, their life's work. Maybe they've committed themselves to certain work and they're now grieving kind of what happens to that work. Is it just thrown out? Is it deleted? Is it continued? The momentum that we've had as I've worked in this work, is it continuing or is it just coming to an end? Some people have named for me that they've imagined retiring from the job that they had. And so this imagined future that they were going to end their career at this agency or in this job, um, that's come to an end and they're grieving that. And then relationships and connections. We spend a lot of time at work. And so we build relationships and connections with the people that we work with, both at our agencies, at our firms, as well as, in the larger community. And when those jobs and roles shift and change and end, we grieve those relationships and those connections that we've had. So, for many people that whether it's in nonprofits or whether they're at consulting firms or at federal agencies, there's a lot of grief attached to the shifts and changes we're seeing in jobs, in the longevity of organizations and agencies as funding is shifting and changing. And so, just kind of naming that grief piece. Trauma is also here as well. And we think about trauma when there's an absence of agency or control and things are happening to you. There can be a traumatic response. And so for some people, there's trauma present in this day because there's a lack of agency, a lack of control, and a lack of safety in how they're navigating the world, navigating the community, whether they have a say over what's happening within their professional sense of self. I live and work in Washington, D.C., and we've navigated a month of uncertainty here, with the influx of agents. And so I've heard from a lot of people that there's fear and there's uncertainty about what happens as you move through the city. And, I don't think we're alone in that. And so just knowing that grief and trauma are showing up, I think gives us a sense of permission to actually acknowledge some of what we're feeling. And so everybody has a different experience with how we're navigating the world right now and how you're thinking about this as agency leaders and as supervisors, as managers, maybe small business holders. And so just knowing that for some of the people who are working for you and with you, they're looking at this at that intersection of grief and trauma. And so it's helpful just to remember that. That can offer some context for some of the responses that we're seeing from folks in particular. You This is something, this is called the circles of control, and I do this a lot with people when I'm meeting individually. And so I wanted to share this now before we get into the framework that I'm going to use today. The circles of control is really looking at the things that are existing in our lives that we have no control over. That's that lighter green circle. The purple inner circle are the things that we have a little or maybe some control over. And then that brighter green smaller circle are the things that we have most control over. And so at some point today, this weekend, next week, I encourage you to jot down the things in your life that you're navigating, that you're holding, that you're existing with, and which category do they fall under? I think about, I work at a small nonprofit and I think about funding, that's kind of hovering between that little and no control, right? We have control over how we're searching for grants, how we're writing the grants, how we're submitting the grants, how we're positioning ourselves, but we don't have control over what philanthropic organizations are doing, what local government is doing, and what the federal government is doing with their RFAs and their grant funding. And sometimes when we are trying to control those things over which we have no control, our anxiety gets heightened. And so, just breaking this down really simply, when we are focusing our energy on controlling things that we have no control over, our anxiety is going to go up. That is how anxiety works. So if we can shift back and think about in this moment, what do I have the most control over? And really focus on that. It could be, the systems I'm setting up at my organization. It could be how I'm addressing staff morale. It could be how you are allocating time to put forth on proposals or how you're, kind of structuring things. And then what's hovering between most control and little control. And sometimes if we refocus there, we actually can lessen our anxiety. Now, that doesn't mean we're not planning and thinking about those things that we have no control over that certainly impact ourselves and our organizations. But we want to make sure that our energy is going into those things that we have more control over. So just something to think about for you to kind of ponder and even talk about with your teams. If you work in an organization or a small business, you can certainly talk about this with your teams. Okay. All right, so this is the framework that we're going to talk about today. You're going to see this slide a couple of times. The little black arrow in the corner will guide us as to what we're focused on. But this is what I've been, how I have framed our work in uncertainty over the past year or so. When we think about uncertainty, there are some strategies, some tools, some information that can help us navigate uncertainty a little bit more successfully. And so today we're going to talk about grounding. Grounding is this idea of coming into present moment awareness, being able to help our nervous system become more regulated, move out of that activation phase and move into into a state of being where we feel more comfortable in our bodies and our bodies are more grounded in this present moment. And so we'll talk about that through the five senses, as well as some practical tools and tips that you can use to notice where your nervous system is and how to tend to it. And then we'll talk about connection, because as I mentioned when we started, connection in times of uncertainty is critical. We know that belonging, do I belong here? Am I wanted here? Am I connected here? Is a critical indicator for well-being. And so we'll talk about belonging, our support system, what collective care can look like at our organizations. We'll talk about the use of rituals to anchor our day, to help us frame our day and to intentionally bring in release and restore. And then we'll finish out with validation, both internal and external validation through a lens of self-compassion. And this can be used both for ourselves as well as a framing for how we engage with those that we're working with and supervising and managing. So we're going to start with grounding and our nervous system. This is a quote from Tara Brach. She is a mindfulness, present moment, awareness guru. She you can find her on the internet. She's got books at your public libraries. And I love this quote from her. And it's from The Sacred Pause. She says, often the moment we most need to pause is exactly when it feels most intolerable to do so. So think about that, right? When we need to actually slow down and take a breath is the time when that can feel really uncomfortable. Like we have to keep moving. We have to get to the next thing. There's a sense of urgency. And in those moments of urgency it's actually critical that we pause so we can fully engage our thinking brain and shift out of that threat detecting part of our brain and really be able to make logical decisions that are grounded in response rather than reaction. And that is easier said than done. I've been told that a lot by people like, I know, you're just going to tell me to breathe. Well, I'm not going to tell you just to take a breath. We're going to talk through this with some science and then some practical steps so that you can put it into action. Because we know that our urgency and some of the strategies that we're currently using are because our bodies are so uncomfortable, right? Anxiety is fairly uncomfortable when we sit in it for periods of time. So this is a framework that we've adapted from the work of Dan Siegel, who really created this idea of name it to tame it. He's a pediatric psychiatrist who works really on the whole child and understanding how the whole child, including their brain and their nervous system development, impacts their well-being and how they show up. He too, as a prolific writer, is very present on the internet and in your local library. So building on what he's talked about, I'm going to offer this framework as a way to kind of pause and to tune in. So from an early age, we are taught to tune out our bodies. We are taught to keep it moving, right? You go to school and suddenly you're eating lunch when they tell you to, and you're, going to the bathroom when the bell rings and you've got a break, and you're moving when they give you recess, instead of actually tuning into our bodies all the time and doing what our bodies need. And so we're taught early on to kind of tune that out, to set the stomach rumbling aside and tune it out and wait for lunch for whenever that comes. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is actually to tune in. And so within this framework, I want you to think about naming what's actually happening on your body. So for me, I might notice that my chest is kind of tight, and so I'm locating it at the same time. I'm noticing a sense of kind of tightness and anxiety, and I'm locating it in my body. And then I'm acknowledging that it's happening. I'm not trying to deny it or fight it or disregard it or ignore it. I'm actually naming there's tightness in my chest. And that opens the door to tend to it, not to fix it, but to actually take care of it. I break this down with an analogy, and this is the one that I use all the time when I'm talking about this, is that if I looked out my window today and the house across the street from me had smoke coming up from it, I would have to first name there's smoke, right? And then I would have to locate it. All right, it's coming from the house. It doesn't look like it's charcoal smoke coming from the backyard. I would have to acknowledge, oh my gosh, this looks like maybe the house is on fire. Something's going on. And that will then allow me to call 911 and be able to say, the house across the street from me has smoke coming from it. It doesn't look normal. If I don't even notice it, just ignore it's there, I certainly can't call 911 to put out the fire. But if I name it and locate it, but then I get stuck on this acknowledgement piece and I'm sitting there debating, like, oh, I hope nobody's home. I hope there's no animals in the house. This is horrible. Do they have smoke detectors? I can't believe this is happening. This shouldn't be happening. And I get into this debate in this acknowledgement phase, then I'm still stuck and I can't call 911 to put it out, right? So these components are really critical to actually tending to our response. And I say tending to your response very intentionally because I don't want to put the burden on you or the expectation that you are going to make all the tightness in your chest go away or that you're going to put the fire out, right? Tending to it is taking care of it. That's calling 911 for a fire or using some regulation strategies that we can to tend to our body response, right? And so This builds into this idea. If you haven't seen Inside Out 2, best movie ever made, in my humble opinion. I love this movie, and it builds on the first one, this idea of these emotions, and it introduces four new emotions kind of need to work in concert or as an orchestra together. One might take the lead and do a little bit of a solo, but the other ones are all right there. But when one of them takes over, like anxiety took over, and starts driving the bus and steering the ship or whatever metaphor you want to use, things go off the rails, right? Because it is now leading with anxiety instead of working with the other emotions. And so Ethan Kross wrote a great book this year. It's called Chatter. It is also available at your local library. And it talks about the internal dialogue or the narrative or the talk that's happening inside our heads. And part of what he's naming in there is that, when we're talking about emotional regulation or when we're talking about psychological distancing from thoughts or any of these coping strategies, the goal isn't to get rid of all of the hard, bad, uncomfortable emotions. That's not our goal, right? Our goal is actually to change the intensity with which we're feeling them, right? You are going to have the plethora of emotions throughout your life, and we want to have the tools to manage the sensations and the responses that those emotions bring up. So the analogy or the metaphor that I've been using is that of a remote control. And in this day, in this week, in this month, there are remote controls. The power button is broken. You cannot turn off what is happening, right? You're at the end of the fiscal year. You are organization leaders, perhaps. You cannot turn off what is happening as you think about budgets for next year. Even the change channel button is kind of wonky in that you might be able to change the channel temporarily. That's called distraction, but it goes back to the kind of regular channel after a period of time. The channel's already on. The button on the remote that is always working is the volume button, meaning we can turn up or down the degree to which we are feeling sensations. And that's that pause that Tara Brach was saying. We want to actually pause so that we can tend to that emotion and we can turn down the intensity with which we are experiencing that. When we get into that debate, that acknowledgement debate, right? That is when suffering enters, right? That struggle of I keep trying to hit the power button, or I'm not able to say, like, actually, my chest is hurting. I'm stuck in this loop of my chest shouldn't be hurting and I should be able to manage this. And I'm leading an organization and people are depending on me and my kids need me. And kind of it continues. That struggle is where suffering enters. When we lessen the struggle, we release the suffering and we allow tending to enter into the space. Okay. And so, what does that look like? What does tending look like? And I will make sure that those of you who are attending today have this slide, this handout. This is a separate handout, and I will make sure that the Glenn and the Horizon Foundation have all of the slides and handouts should you be watching this on a recording and want them. But we think about regulation, and regulation is getting our body back to comfortable, getting our nervous system back to a space where it's in the window of tolerance. For those of you who know that, I think about that as like our bodies are back to comfortable and we can navigate the day without too much struggle. So regulation strategies, we tend to think about them across 8 categories at the Went Center. Breathing is certainly one part of it. That is a critical part of it, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. But when we jump right to breathing and we say to somebody, just take a breath, it can feel dismissive. It can feel like what I'm feeling is not so intense that you're actually talking to me about it. You're just telling me to take a breath. So we want breathing in our menu of items, but I want to talk about these other ones kind of first, and then we'll talk about breathing at the end because it is that important. So as I said, we want a menu of options. Think about this as the buffet of options. This is when actual quantity of coping strategies is more important than the intense quality. It is more important to have, 10 or 15 solid coping strategies or regulation strategies than one spectacular one. So we want different options for us depending on what's happening. So, sensory experiences are really, really important when it comes to regulating our nervous system. We take in information through our five senses, so those five senses work equally as well to regulate us. I like to talk about peppermint. I carry individually wrapped lifesavers with me just about everywhere I go. They're in my bag, which is downstairs, they're on my desk, they're in our offices. I hand them out when I go out places because peppermint is an incredibly regulating scent. And when you take a peppermint mint that has a circle in it and you pop it in your mouth, now you can look at the texture. You can feel the texture of that mint. When you breathe in, cold, your breath becomes cold, which is also regulating your nervous system. You can crunch the mint, and now you're crunching and you're getting that sensation. You can even hear that. And peppermint also activates both the sinuses as well as the salivary glands. And so peppermint is incredibly helpful. Two white little tic tacs under your tongue work just as well, and you can talk with those in your mouth. I like the circle peppermints because they're a little bit bigger, so they help you pause a little bit longer while you're letting it dissolve or kind of tending to it in your mouth. Peppermint chapstick or peppermint lip balm on your lips, around your nose, also gives off that scent. Peppermint tea, I drink all the time because the smell and the taste is incredibly regulating. If you don't like peppermint, sour works well. Like lemon sour candies also activate that salivary gland and bring you right back into your body. The other thing is ice. Significant changes in temperature, specifically around your neck or your wrist, actually help regulate the vagus nerve. It gets your nervous system back into a regulated, comfortable state. So having a cool compress or a cool ice pack on the back of your neck or holding ice cubes over a sink or a trash can be incredibly regulating. Okay. Fidgets work really well too. If you don't have fidgets, good old binder clips from the supply closet work well. You can push on those, you can bend them, the metal clips, you can run the metal clip over your finger. You can even put them on your finger if that isn't going to damage your finger or hurt too much. So fidgets, Play-Doh, kind of putty, those kinds of things, as well as there's squish balls, anything you can purchase fidgets. You can just put fidgets into your search engine and it'll pop up. But binder clips are a really accessible way to kind of get your body focused into the here and now. Movement and environment shifts are equally as important. Moving the energy through your body. This could be through stretching, through gentle stretching, through push ups against the wall, taking the stairs and noticing the steps in your thighs. This could be just getting up and changing your seat, changing where you're located, and then you're bringing in an environment shift. When I'm working at my desk, it could be just turning around and looking out the window so that I'm positioning myself from looking into my office to looking outside and into nature. It could be going and sitting outside if that's possible. Walking meetings are incredibly helpful. Walking with your person, now you're engaging connection and movement and an environment shift. Cognitive tasks also bring us into the thinking part of our brain. I have found cognitive tasks incredibly important right about now. When we're in the threat or the worry part of our brain, we need to come back into the thinking part of our brain, and cognitive tasks do that. That could be a word search. You can print those out for free, or you can go to the, pharmacy or the dollar store and get one of those word searches. And maybe you look for 3 words and then you get back to work. Or maybe you have the crossword puzzle and you cut that out of the newspaper. It's very old school. Cut that out of the newspaper and you put it in your staff lounge, and collectively you guys are all doing the crossword puzzle together. It could be setting an alarm, and that is critical, on your phone or a timer, and then doing one of those logic puzzles. I've been doing the one where I have to trace the line and not cross over it lately. People like Wordle or connections. So doing a cognitive task can be really helpful to bringing us back into the thinking part of our brain. If you're working with kids, this is where Where's Waldo or Spot It or Find the Hidden Pictures can work really well. It can work really well for you too. Creative expression and connection are pretty self-explanatory, but those are beautiful ways to kind of get your body back to grounded. It could be texting a friend and just being like SOS or oh my gosh, and they just know to respond to you. They know to send you a funny meme or a funny cartoon or something. Coloring, printing out coloring pages, having music, a playlist. Maybe you have a playlist for getting to work and coming home from work. Really important. And then your basic needs, I can't underestimate the value of tending to your basic needs. If you're hangry, if you are hungry or dehydrated or feeling kind of restless or exhausted, it's very hard to function. So making sure you're drinking water and eating food and getting horizontal so that something is supporting your body if sleep has been elusive. And then finally, breathing is really important because the exhale of our breath activates our vagus nerve, which helps to regulate our nervous system. It gets us back into connected and our comfortable rest state. And so humming a flat, like not a tune, not a happy birthday, but just a flat note of humming works really well. You can do, it's football season, so you can do touchdown breaths where you put your arms up like the end zone and then you breathe in and lift your arms up and breathe out as you exhale. As you lower your arms, that engages the body. Or triangle breaths where you breathe in for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, and then go out for a count of 6. All of those things can be really helpful to regulating your nervous system. Now, here's the thing is that you have to practice them, okay? You have to practice them so that they are readily available for you when you need them. This is not, you don't want to be learning in the midst of a crisis, right? So you want to make sure that you're practicing them. That could be your doing a regulation strategy with somebody when you're doing your check-in or your supervision or you're starting a staff meeting or every time you get a text message, that's a cue to do something, or you're setting a reminder or a timer. Okay. Um, so, really practicing them is really critical. And then integrating a daily check in with yourself. When you wake up in the morning or in the middle of the day, noticing what's my body telling me? What does my body need? Your body gives you data all day, every day. Listen to it. It's telling you what it needs, whether it's movement or food or water or physical connection or rest. All right. And then what's your mind doing? Is it kind of confused? Is there brain fog, forgetfulness? This is a time when I've been writing down passwords instead of relying on my memory. I've been putting notes at the door. There's one that says turn out the lights because I've been forgetting to do that. Or I've been putting, trying to not rely on my memory as much and actually write things down because recall and clarity has been difficult to find lately. And then tuning into what's my emotions? How am I feeling today? And that's going to give you data on how to tend to yourself. Okay. So it's about tuning in, really, really important. All right. So that was our nervous system kind of grounding. We're going to shift to the idea of connection. So, connection is incredibly important as we think about tending to ourselves during difficult times. We are biologically wired to live in community. As mammals, that is how our brain and our nervous system is wired. And so, we need to think about intentionally connecting with people. So, we're going to start with this idea of collective care. Collective care is the tending to the group, taking care of one another. This could be your team, it could be your agency staff, it could be your family, it could be your community, it could be an association, and it has to be grounded in respect and dignity. So you have to, when you engage in collective care, you have to know that I respect who you are and what you do, and there is dignity for you as a human being that is present. Because if we are going to engage in any sort of accountability, compassionate accountability, gentle and loving accountability, I have to know that the person who's holding me accountable to take care of myself is not questioning my job or my work, is doing it because they value me as a human being. So we need to have respect and dignity in the center of our collective care. We also have to engage in seeking and receiving support. So, for those of you who are leading an organization, this might mean connecting with other leaders at an organization to talk about how hard it is to be an executive director right now. For managers, connecting with other managers and frontline staff, etc. This is about tuning in to what's going well. Deb Dana calls that the glimmers. We want to look for what's going well and highlight that. And then compassionate accountability is when we can say to somebody, I see how hard you're working and I see how you're being impacted by what is happening. I want to remind you to take care of yourself. Does that look like a day off? Does that look like sending somebody lunch? Does it look like texting them and saying, I see what you're doing. This is a hard time? Is that reminding them to drink water? So, that compassionate accountability is the accountability to ourselves to take care of ourselves, to tend to our needs, to engage in wellness. And the compassionate part of that is that we're doing it because I care about you as a human being. Your humanness is important to me. And the work you do has value to me as well. So I care about you as a human being and I value you as a worker. Therefore, it behooves me to center your wellness. And so we can hold each other accountable. All right. The other piece of these connections is this idea of who's in your support network. I think about this across three buckets. And in my three buckets of people, I've got those who are my listeners. These are people who listen without judging, without jumping to problem solving, without getting super uncomfortable. They can hold this space. And then I've got my doers or my problem solvers. These are our folks who can jump into problem solving mode and can think of some creative solutions. And then there's my distractors or my respite providers. These are our folks who can help me just take my mind off of it, who can help me check out. And I want to make sure that I've got people in each of those buckets. And sometimes it's helpful to actually write down the three buckets and then list out people in those. If you have somebody who cuts across all three buckets, meaning you've got somebody in your life who is a listener, a doer, and a distractor, when you're engaging with them, you will then have to tell them what you need, what role you need them to play. So it's like, I need support today. I need you just to listen. Or I need you to help me problem solve. Could you be a thought partner on this with me? Or I just need to take my mind off this. Can we just go for a walk and talk about, the latest, reality television show? Or can we just go sit in nature? Can we watch a movie? Or have you listened to this playlist? So you want to make sure that you've got people across all three buckets. And again, if you've got somebody who cuts across all three buckets, that you're telling them what you need from them. And then think about it. It might not just be people who are local, it could be people who live elsewhere. And so tapping into those folks virtually, whether it's on a video call or whether you're texting them or a phone call. Okay. So thinking about your network of supports is really important. And then encouraging you as you think about connection to make a plan. And this is a plan that you might need to write down and take a picture of. And so, who are the people that I can reach out to for support, right? Think back to those buckets of people. What can I do to regulate my body or process what is happening? And that goes back to that chart. When am I going to make time to practice tending to myself? This might be an intentional pause during the day or at the top of the hour, or, every time your phone dings or the little email dings happen. Where can I go if I need a break during the day? Is it outside? Is it to the restroom? Is it, closing your office door? Is it to your backyard if you're working from home? But where can I go if I need a break during the day? And then again, how will I know when I need to use these skills? What is my body telling me? And how am I going to listen to it? That last question can be the most difficult in this making a plan because it requires me to tune in. It requires me to tune in and to listen to my body. And so that's important to start practicing that tuning in. Okay. All right. So we've talked about grounding in the nervous system. We've talked about a little bit about connection. Now we're going to talk about rituals. Rituals are incredibly important. We use rituals a lot in our grief work with individuals. They are anchors for the memorial or the mourning process. But rituals can also be used outside of grief. They can be used, they've been used in indigenous populations for centuries as ways to celebrate and to honor and to mark and to contain the day. And so this is from the work of Francis Weller. He has written a number of books, and he is also in your local library. But he talks about how rituals can be really reparative. They can provide a container for the difficult emotions that we're feeling. He notes that often we don't want to dip into those heavy emotions or the difficult emotions because it feels like they're going to swallow us. They're just going to consume us. But when we put a ritual in place, it provides a bottom and some sides. So we know that we can then contain those emotions as opposed to being fully absorbed or consumed by them. They allow us to engage collectively. Many rituals involve community, and they do, science has shown that they help restore our natural rhythm. So we think about rituals in this way to make it very accessible and very approachable. Anytime we take a common routine and we add mindful intention, we have a ritual, right? Common routine plus mindful intention is a ritual. So the one of the examples I've been using a lot is for those of you who have a dog and you walk your dog. Many people put earbuds in when they're walking their dog. I'm encouraging you to take your earbuds out or your headphones out and connect with your dog. Notice the tension on the leash. Notice where they're sniffing. Notice how the wind blows through their fur. Get on their level. Are they looking at the squirrel that way? What are they looking at? That connection, that mindful intention to presence can turn something that you have to do into a ritual. Laundry, is something that we all have to do. And so folding laundry, mindfully and intentionally folding laundry, sorting it by color or by person in your household can be uh, can be an incredible ritual as well when you put in the mindful intention there. Um, Making coffee or tea. I am a coffee drinker, so it's the smell of the grounds, the boiling of the water and pouring it over, the putting the top of the French press, pushing it down, the taste, the smell of the first cup of coffee. When I do that with mindful intention, my coffee becomes a ritual. I am tuning in and I am present. And then throughout the day, you have to wash your hands, right? So after you use the restroom or before you're getting food or something, feel the water. Notice the soap on your hands. Notice what it feels like when you release it and it goes down the drain. Notice the smell. So, the last time you washed your hands, you might have been thinking about like a to-do list, things you had to buy at the grocery store, emails you had to send, or, something you hadn't done. But coming in and being present and noticing your hands in the water can be incredibly helpful. Okay. So think about throughout your day how you can have a morning ritual when you enter into work, a midday ritual, and then an end of day ritual. It might be that you have like a walk up song as you're leading up to work, driving up to your organization, and then you pause before you go in, right? Maybe in the middle of the day, it's the pausing and the washing of hands or tuning in. And at the end of the day, maybe it's driving home with your windows down and playing your favorite song and singing at the top of your lungs. So think about how you can insert rituals to provide that container. All right, this last piece in our framework that I want to talk about is that of validation. Validation is both internal and external. It's really critical as humans. We seek validation all the time, being told, I see how hard you're working, or that was a great job, or, even I play tennis, and when somebody has a great serve, you're like, ooh, great serve, right? Validation of your work, validation of that serve. So internal and external validation is really important. And self-compassion is a critical component in our validation practice. And self compassion opens hope or offers hope when hope is hard to find. Okay, it offers hope when hope is hard to find. And Kristen Neff is a self compassion guru. She's written a lot of books. She's got a great website with a lot of free resources. She is also in your local library. And she writes that there are three components to self compassion. The first is self kindness. Self kindness is talking to ourselves with the same tone and manner that we would talk to our best friends. Often our own inner voice is layered with judgment and shame and is very critical. But like if my best friend called me today and said, "You're not going to believe the day that I had. I got a flat tire, my computer crashed, my kid failed to test, my dog had diarrhea all over my house." I'm not going to be like, "Girl, get over it." Like there are far more people suffering more than you. You to figure it out. No, I'm going to be like, "Hold on, let me pull the car over or let me pause what I'm doing. This sounds really hard. Tell me about it." Right? But when we talk to ourselves, it's often layered with, "You should be able to handle this. You should be able to manage this. You have the resources, so therefore you should know what to do." And that's layered with judgment, and shame. The second component that she talks about is mindfulness. Mindfulness incorporates meditation. Meditation is one part of it, but it's a much bigger umbrella. Mindfulness is present moment awareness. Mindfulness is coming back into the now, as opposed to being in the future or worrying about the past. Okay. It's here and now. We are the only mammals that can worry about the future and ruminate about the past. Dolphins, they're living in the moment, jumping through waves, looking for fish, taking a nap. Right? We have to live in mindfulness, asks us to come back to present moment awareness. And then common humanity is the third component. And here she's talking about that while your pain and your challenge and your difficulty is unique, you are not alone in your pain and your difficulty, and your challenge. There are other people in this community, in this world, who are also struggling. And so it's not looking for a comparison or a minimization. It's looking for connection. And it softens the why me, woe is me, only me. And it connects us with other people in our struggle, which can help us feel less alone and less isolated, and can also help activate the self-compassion and can activate us into action. Okay. So this is a art installation at Studio B in New Orleans, and he's got great work. And this really resonated with me. How do you look terror in the face and still muster the courage to love? Right? That speaks to compassion. That's what came to mind as I was looking at that, and and continuing to find those moments of love and moments of joy. So Kristen Neff continues to talk about self-compassion, and she recently came out with some comparisons between mindfulness, or the difference between mindfulness and self-compassion. She talks about mindfulness is focused on the acceptance of the experience, right? Some might call that equanimity, whereas self-compassion is focusing on caring for the experiencer. Mindfulness asks, "What am I experiencing in this moment?" Self-compassion asks, "What do I need right now?" And so, really thinking about the difference between those two, but there's also some crossover and some connection there. And she and Christopher Gemmer wrote a book. I happen to have it right here. It's called A Mindful Self-Compassion for Burnout. Came out last year. And it's a great book for anybody in a caretaking role, either professionally or personally, or you're leading an organization. It is hard to be a caretaker these days. And in the book, she names this idea of compassionate equanimity. And this is the idea that while I would love to solve everybody's problems, whew, that's a big burden to bear. And so she's got this saying, and many people, this has resonated with many of us at the Went Center who are in caretaking roles. And we use it sometimes as a mantra or an anchor. We might have it printed out on our computer or at our desk. But I'm going to read it out loud and let it kind of wash over you. Everyone is on their own life journey. I am not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it entirely within my power to make it go away, even though I wish I could. Moments like this are difficult to bear, right? Think about that. That everybody, if you are in a nonprofit that is trying to find housing for people, of course you wish you could house everybody. You believe in housing first, and you would love to get housing as a gateway to stability. And that's not within your power right now, even though you really wish it could be. And that is difficult to go home at the end of the day knowing you could not house everybody. And so it's a reminder that I have a role, I have a lane, and I can't take on everything, right? And so that I can be present, compassionately present with somebody while not owning all aspects of the struggle, of the journey. Okay. And she continues, this actually is a quote that we picked back up. It's from earlier, it's from 2015, but this really resonated with us during COVID, and I'm seeing it come up again. This idea of pausing, this idea, remember we talked at the beginning with Tara Brock about pause. And this is how do we let compassion in and self-compassion in? She uses the word suffering here. I'm going to replace it with pain or challenge or difficulty. Um, but she says here, like this is a moment. And that moment could be a literal moment. It could be a day, a week, a month, a year. This is a moment of difficulty, of challenge, of pain. And that difficulty, challenge, and pain is a part of life, right? Like we are not guaranteed a challenge-free life. We are going to be human is to encounter pain, to encounter difficulty. So this is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need. This is the validation. It's the acknowledgement that this is a difficult moment and that this is a part of life. This goes back to that kind of common humanity. And so, building on this, we're going to loop in the work here of Ethan Kross. So again, he's the one who wrote Chatter, and he talks in Chatter about psychological distancing. This is about creating some distance from me and the issue that's happening, the language, the chatter in my brain. That when we create that distance, it actually opens up capacity and it shifts us from, is this a threat or is it a challenge? Because if something is a challenge, bring it on. I can do that. If something is a threat, my nervous system is activating and I'm working in a little bit of a different way. So he talks about to gain psychological distance, we can talk about and to ourselves in the third person. So we would take her kind of language here, Kristen Neff's language, and we would say, this is a moment of difficulty. Difficulty is a part of life. May Melissa be kind to herself in this moment. So I replaced may I. May Melissa be kind to herself in this moment. May she give herself the compassion she needs. So I'm creating some distance there between me and the struggle. And that opens up a little bit of capacity, right? So that third person, referring to yourself in the third person, very George Costanza, right? But referring to yourself in the third person can create some of that distance. And then finally, Christopher Gemmer, who is also a self-compassion author, and he partnered with Kristen Neff on a lot of books, the Self-Compassion Handout, this latest book. He did a talk, a webinar that I attended, and he talked about active or behavioral self-compassion. And I really liked this because it brought into action self-compassion, which can feel very abstract or elusive sometimes. And so this brings it into action, which allows us to practice it a little bit more. So here are 6 questions. Do not pick all 6, but pick 1 or 2 that you could ask yourself. In this moment, what do I need to comfort myself emotionally? In this moment, what do I need to soothe myself physically? In this moment, what do I need to validate how I feel? So it's asking a question that you can then answer, right? So think about the answer. Oh, well, to soothe myself physically, I need to move my body or tend to the tightness I'm feeling or drink some water. Or maybe I need to wrap myself in a blanket. Maybe I need to move, right? So you can ask these questions of yourself. Pick 1 or 2 and ask yourself periodically throughout the day. Or when you notice activation, you can ask yourself that as well. And it brings into practice this tending. They talk about self-compassion is the balm. It's what you need. It's the tending at that moment when we need it. And so this actively brings it in. Okay. And then finally, here's one last thing for you to think about is that Sometimes when we think about the big picture, how am I going to lead this organization this entire year? How am I, in grief, I talk about this a lot with people that, you think about like, how am I going to live the rest of my life without my person? Right? How am I going to exist this entire year with whatever fill in the blank is happening? How am I going to manage this? There's no possible way. Well, when we narrow the focus, it makes it a little bit more manageable. So think about it like a peephole. That's what the picture is. It's a peephole on a door. They have them on apartments or hotels. And when you look through them, they narrow the focus and they actually magnify it a little bit. So you can't see the whole hallway or the whole front yard. You can just see a little section of it. So when I narrow the focus, things become a little bit more manageable. How am I going to manage the next minute? How am I going to manage today? How am I going to manage this week? Right? We're dosing it. We're getting it a little bit more narrow, a little bit more manageable so that we can focus on it. If you need to do that kind of physically to bring it to life, you just look through like a toilet paper roll or punch a hole in a piece of paper and look through the piece of paper or narrow your focus with binoculars, right? You can look through your finger like this. So you're narrowing your focus. And and then think about if in this moment what I'm doing, is it helpful or is it harmful? I think about that with social media and like the doom scrolling. Is looking at the news helpful in this moment or is it harmful? Is reviewing the financial statements of the organization in this moment helpful or harmful? And I know you got to review them. You're going to get to them. But in this moment, do you have the capacity to do that? In this moment is, I don't know, turning on the news helpful or harmful? And so you can ask that question to help you set a boundary, re-narrow your focus so that you can offer that tending. Okay. All right. Well, this is our website. Should you have some information, want to seek out more information about us. Again, we see people individually and in groups who live in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. My contact information is up there as well. We have tip sheets and fact sheets available. And then, of course, I have my citations. I want to make sure I give credit where credit is needed. And so if you'll get this information. We'll make sure that Horizon Foundation has this information as well as that handout that I referenced. But if you've got questions or anything, I'm happy to answer them. Um, while you're getting ready to put that in the chat, I just really want to thank the Horizon Foundation for connecting with us and taking the time to recognize what communities need in this moment, and offering that resource. Well, I didn't give you answers, I don't have the solution. Hopefully, between this information and the incredible support and resource that the Horizon Foundation is, you can find a path forward. You can find a way forward, step by step, day by day, during a really difficult time. All right. So I'm gonna